I'll never forget the sound of that engine giving up. It wasn't a cough or a sputter, it was the final, metallic sigh of a machine pushed past its limit, a sound that promised a world of trouble for whoever was behind the wheel. For me, it promised another long night under the flickering fluorescent lights of a garage that was bleeding me dry. He was just a man who fixed a stranger's car on a rain-slicked night, expecting nothing in return. She offered shelter to one family during a blizzard, never imagining that by morning her quiet street would become a silent testament to a debt that could only be repaid in loyalty and power. The wind was a living thing that night, a beast clawing at the old bones of Ilara's house. It rattled the window panes in their warped frames and moaned down the chimney, a lonely sound that echoed the hollow spaces in her life since her husband Marco had passed. For 3 days, the snow had fallen, a relentless white curtain erasing the world, burying her small bungalow in the Iron Gate neighborhood under a thick, silent blanket. She was 72, her world shrunk to these 4 walls, the scent of dried herbs, and the flickering black and white photos on the mantelpiece. The television droned on about citywide shutdowns and travel bans, but Ilara didn't need a news anchor to tell her she was isolated. The silence told her. The cold seeping through the floorboards told her. Her house, once loud with Marco's laughter and the clatter of his work boots, was now just an outpost against the storm and her memories. She was stirring a pot of lentil soup, its savory steam a small act of defiance against the chill, when she heard it. A sound so out of place in the blizzard's roar that she almost thought she'd imagined it, a firm, desperate knocking on her front door. Her heart gave a sharp, frightened thump. No one came to this door anymore, especially not in a storm that had swallowed the city whole. Her neighbors, the Gazas and the Petrellis, were hunkered down like she was. A flicker of fear, cold and sharp, went through her. This neighborhood, her home for 50 years, wasn't what it used to be. It was rougher around the edges, with shadows that lingered long after the sun went down. Marco had always been her lock, her bolt, her protector. Without him, she felt the thinness of the door, the fragility of the glass. The knocking came again, louder this time, insistent, not aggressive, but urgent. A deep male voice called out, muffled by the wind and wood. "Please, we saw your light, our car. It went off the road. We have children with us." Children. The word cut through her fear. She thought of her own grandchildren, safe and warm 2 states away. She pictured small hands red with cold, small faces chapped by the wind. Marco's voice echoed in her head, a memory so clear it was almost a presence in the room. "You never turn your back on someone in need, Kara. Never." Taking a deep breath, Ilara turned off the stove, her hand trembling slightly as she wiped it on her apron. She moved to the door, her old slippers whispering against the worn floorboards. She peered through the peephole, but it was frosted over, a milky blind eye. The decision rested entirely on a voice in the wind and a lifetime of ingrained compassion. Comment below. Would you open that door? The moment she turned the deadbolt, a gust of frigid air and swirling snow burst into her warm hallway, as if the storm itself was invading her sanctuary. Framed in the doorway stood a man, broad-shouldered and imposing, flakes of snow clinging to his dark overcoat and hair. But it wasn't his size that held her attention. It was his eyes. They were dark, exhausted, but held a piercing intensity, a seriousness that seemed to go deeper than the immediate crisis. Behind him, a woman huddled, her arms wrapped around a small boy who couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. A teenage girl, her face pale and defiant, stood just beside her mother, her gaze scanning the street as if expecting a threat from the shadows. They were a family, just as he'd said. A well-dressed family, their clothes expensive, but now soaked and useless against the blizzard's fury. "Police," the man said again, his voice a low rumble. "Just until the storm breaks. The tow trucks. They're not running." Ilara looked past him at the little boy, whose shivering was visible even under his thick coat. That was all it took. She stepped back, holding the door wide. "Don't just stand there in the cold," she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. "Come in, all of you. Get in before you freeze." They entered with a quiet, almost reverent deference, shuffling their feet carefully on the mat she'd laid inside the door. The man removed his hat, revealing dark, silver-streaked hair. He had the kind of face that belonged to another time, etched with lines of worry and authority. "We are in your debt," he said, his eyes meeting hers. It wasn't a casual pleasantry. It felt like a solemn vow. The woman, Isabella, gave a small, grateful smile. "Thank you. You have no idea." The teenage daughter, Sophia, said nothing, her eyes darting around the small, cozy living room, taking in the worn armchair, the crocheted afghans, the photos of Marco. She seemed suspicious, coiled tight with a tension that felt out of place. But the little boy, Matteo, looked up at Ilara with wide, curious eyes. Ilara's heart softened completely. "There's soup on the stove," she said, closing the door and shutting out the storm's howl. "It's not much, but it's hot." She led them toward the kitchen, the heart of her home. The man introduced himself only as Mr. Valenti. No first name. She didn't offer hers either, not yet. An old habit from a neighborhood where you learned to listen more than you spoke. As they shed their wet coats, she saw that Mr. Valenti's knuckles were scraped raw, and a dark bruise was forming on his temple. Their car hadn't just gone off the road. It looked like it had been a violent ordeal. A strange, unspoken story hung in the air between them, thick and heavy like the winter quiet. What kind of trouble had they been running from when the storm caught them? The kitchen was small and warm, smelling of garlic and oregano. Ilara ladled thick lentil soup into her best bowls, the ones she saved for holidays. The family sat at her small wooden table, the one Marco had built with his own hands 60 years ago. For a moment, seeing them there, the empty chairs filled, a phantom warmth spread through Ilara's chest. It felt right, but the feeling was followed by a prickle of unease. They were strangers, and Mr. Valenti's silence was a heavy blanket. He ate, slowly, methodically, his gaze sweeping over the room, noticing every detail. He wasn't just a guest, he was an observer, assessing, calculating. Isabella, however, seemed to relax in the warmth. She helped her son Matteo with his spoon, whispering to him in gentle Italian. The language was a comfort to Ilara, the sound of her own childhood. "My husband, Marco, he would have loved this," Ilara found herself saying, her voice a little thick. She gestured to a photo on the wall, a smiling, handsome man with flour on his cheek. "He always said a warm meal could solve half the world's problems." Isabella looked at the photo, then back at Ilara, her expression full of a deep, knowing empathy. "He looks like a good man. He was the best," Ilara said simply. A small bond formed in that exchange, a quiet understanding between two women. Sophia, the daughter, remained guarded. She ate without a word, her fork clicking softly against the bowl, her eyes fixed on her plate. She seemed to be listening to the wind, to the house, to the spaces between their words, searching for a threat. But it was the boy, Matteo, who finally broke the tension. He finished his soup, looked directly at Ilara, and gave her a brilliant, gap-toothed smile. "This is the best soup in the world," he declared. A genuine laugh escaped Ilara's lips, the first she'd had in days. Even Mr. Valenti's stern face softened at the corners. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture of immense, quiet pride. As the evening wore on, the storm raged with renewed fury. The lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the house into sudden, profound darkness. Isabella gasped. Sophia stiffened, but Mr. Valenti didn't flinch, and Ilara, who had lived through more blackouts than she could count, simply sighed. "Well," she said, her voice calm in the dark, "it seems you're staying the night." She could feel their eyes on her in the pitch-black room, their unspoken questions hanging heavy in the air. Was she afraid? Trapped in the dark with these imposing strangers? Strangely, she wasn't. Ilara moved through the darkness with a muscle memory born of decades. Her hand found the drawer with the matches, then the thick emergency candles she kept on the counter. In moments, the kitchen was filled with a soft, flickering glow. The candlelight threw long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the small space feel like a secret cave, a haven sealed off from the raging world. The golden light softened their faces, erasing some of the hard lines of worry. Isabella's shoulders relaxed. Matteo watched the flame with wide-eyed wonder. Even Sophia's guarded expression seemed to ease, just a little. Better, Ilara said, setting a candelabra on the table. Mr. Valenti was watching her, not with suspicion, but with a look of profound respect. "You are prepared," he stated. It wasn't a question. "A woman alone learns to be," she replied simply, and in her words, he seemed to hear a whole history of resilience. He stood up and walked to the window that had been rattling the most, the one in the pantry. He ran a hand along the frame, his touch surprisingly gentle. "There is a draft," he said. "It's letting the cold in." Before Ilara could tell him not to worry about it, he was heading for the front door. "I have a small toolbox in the car. I can fix it." "You can't go out in that," Isabella protested, her voice sharp with worry. "It's nothing," he said, and the calm authority in his voice left no room for argument. He pulled on his coat and disappeared into the swirling white chaos. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the howling wind and the frantic beating of Isabella's heart, which seemed to fill the room. Ilara put a comforting hand on her arm. "He will be fine. A man who worries about a draft in a stranger's house knows how to take care of himself." The words seemed to soothe her. Soon, Mr. Valenti returned, covered in a fresh layer of snow, but holding a small, worn leather tool roll. He was methodical and efficient. In the flickering candlelight, he worked on the old window frame, his large hands surprisingly deft. He used a small shim of wood he'd found in the toolbox and a bit of sealant to quiet the rattle and block the icy draft. It was a small thing, a simple repair, but it was an act of service, a rebalancing of the scales. He was not just a taker of shelter, he was a contributor, a protector in his own way. When he was finished, a noticeable quiet settled in that corner of the house. He packed his tools neatly and turned to Ilara. "Thank you for the light," he said. And she knew he wasn't just talking about the candles, he was thanking her for the trust. And in that moment she realized her home hadn't felt this safe, this looked after since Marco was alive. But who was this man who could face a blizzard for a stranger's drafty window, yet carried the weight of the world in his eyes? When it was time to sleep, the house presented a challenge. It was a home built for two, not five. Ilara was unflinching. "You and your husband will take my room," she told Isabella. "The bed is comfortable. Sophia, you can have the guest room. It's small, but the blankets are warm." She pointed to the old floral print sofa in the living room. "Matteo can sleep here, by the fire." "But where will you sleep?" Isabella asked, her face etched with concern. Ilara waved a dismissive hand. "This old armchair and I are well acquainted," she said with a smile, patting the worn, comfortable seat where she often dozed off reading. "I will be fine." There were protests, of course, polite and insistent, but Ilara was firm. In her house, she was the host, and her guests' comfort was paramount. It was a rule as unshakable as Marco's old workbench. Reluctantly, they agreed. She gave them her warmest quilts, blankets that smelled of cedar and thyme. As she watched Isabella lead a sleepy Matteo to the sofa and tuck him in, a strange feeling washed over her. The house was breathing again. The empty rooms were full. The silence was no longer a hollow ache, but a peaceful quiet, punctuated by the soft sounds of other people's rest. It was a ghost of the life she once had, and it was beautiful and heartbreaking all at once. Later, lying in the dark of the living room, bundled in an afghan in her armchair, she couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, except for the dying whisper of the wind and the soft creak of the floorboards upstairs. She listened, not out of suspicion, but out of a new sense of responsibility. These were her people, for tonight. Her flock. From the room above, her room, she heard faint, muffled voices. Mr. Valenti and Isabella speaking in low Italian. She couldn't make out the words, only the tone. It was a worried, urgent whisper. She heard the word debito, debt, and honor, honor. They weren't just grateful for a bed. They felt they had incurred a significant obligation, an old-world weight of reciprocity that Ilara understood in her bones. She closed her eyes. Was she a fool? A naive old woman who had let danger into her home? She thought of the scraped knuckles, the watchful eyes of the daughter, the sheer intensity of the father. There was more to their story, a darkness they had carried in with them out of the storm. Yet, she also thought of the little boy's trusting smile, the mother's deep gratitude, and the father's quiet act of fixing her window. He hadn't just blocked a draft, he had mended a small hole in her world. A profound sense of peace settled over her. Whatever they were, tonight, they were just a family, and they were safe. But what would the morning light reveal about the debt they felt they owed? The morning broke in a way that felt like a miracle. The wind had died, and the world outside Ilara's window was utterly transformed. A thick, pristine blanket of snow covered everything, sparkling under a brilliant, cloudless sky. The silence was absolute, a holy quiet that seemed to absorb all sound. The city was still asleep under its white shroud. Ilara was the first one up, her internal clock unbothered by power outages. But when she entered her kitchen, she found she was not alone. Isabella was already there, moving softly in the grey pre-dawn light. The scent of coffee filled the air. She had found Ilara's old percolator and was heating water on the gas stove. She had also tidied the living room, folding the blankets Matteo had used and plumping the couch cushions. "Good morning," Isabella said, her voice a soft melody. "I hope you don't mind. I found the coffee." "Not at all," Ilara replied, a genuine smile spreading across her face. It's been a long time since someone else made coffee in this kitchen. A comfortable quiet settled between them as they waited for the coffee to brew. The power flickered back on with a hum, and the digital clock on the microwave flashed a cheerful, nonsensical 12 Normalcy was returning. One by one, the rest of the family emerged. Matteo, still sleepy and warm, padded into the kitchen and gave Ilara a shy hug around her legs, a gesture of pure, childish affection that melted the last of her reservations. Sophia came last, her hair brushed, her expression still cautious, but less hostile. She gave Ilara a small nod. "Thank you," she mumbled, the words costing her an effort. Mr. Valenti entered last, dressed again in his dark, immaculate overcoat. The storm had passed, and it was time for them to go. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The cozy domesticity of the morning evaporated, replaced by the same quiet urgency they had arrived with. He stood before Ilara, his family arrayed behind him like a loyal guard. "We cannot thank you enough," he said, his voice deep and formal. "You gave us shelter. You showed us kindness when you had every reason not to. This is something that will not be forgotten." He looked around the small, humble house, at the worn furniture and the lovingly tended plants. His eyes seemed to see everything, the lifetime of hard work, the quiet dignity, the solitude. "You have a good heart," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "This neighborhood, this city, it is fortunate to have people like you in it." It was a strange compliment, grand and a little ominous. He was speaking as if he were a guardian of the city itself. Before she could process his words, he reached into his coat. What would he do now as the daylight streamed in, exposing them all? Mr. Valenti's hand emerged from his coat not with a weapon, but with a thick, plain white envelope. He held it out to her. "For your trouble," he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "For the food, the warmth, for everything." Ilara looked at the envelope, then back at his unyielding face. She immediately shook her head, her hands clasped behind her back. "No," she said firmly. I couldn't possibly. You were in trouble. It was nothing. It's what anyone would have done. A flicker of something, annoyance, respect, crossed his face. You do not understand, he said, his voice dropping lower, more intense. Where I come from, a kindness like this creates a debt. It is a matter of respect to acknowledge it. Please, take it. He pushed the envelope gently toward her. It felt heavy, solid. The thought of taking money for her help felt wrong, a violation of the simple, human connection they had shared. It would turn her act of compassion into a transaction. I won't, she insisted, her chin lifting. My husband Marco would turn in his grave. We don't take payment for helping people. For the first time, a real, faint smile touched Mr. Valenti's lips. It transformed his severe face. Your husband was a good man, I am sure, he said. But he is not here, and I must insist. He took her hand, his grip surprisingly gentle, and pressed the envelope into her palm, closing her fingers around it. Do not insult me by refusing. The finality in his voice was absolute. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that arguing further would be a grave mistake. She clutched the envelope, the paper crisp and foreign against her skin. Isabella gave her a small, apologetic look, as if to say, it is his way. With the transaction complete, the spell was broken. They moved toward the door. Matteo hugged her again, a quick, warm squeeze. Isabella took both of Ilara's hands in hers. May God bless you, she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Mr. Valenti simply nodded once, a gesture that conveyed more than 100 words of thanks. Then they were gone. Ilara stood at the door, watching them walk down her freshly shoveled path. He must have done that too, before she woke. To a large black sedan that was now parked at the curb, miraculously unharmed. The car started silently and pulled away, leaving perfect tire tracks in the pristine snow. The street was quiet again. The house was empty again. The silence that rushed in to fill the space was heavier than before. She looked down at the thick white envelope in her hand, a tangible reminder of the surreal night. She was alone with it. And a dawning, terrifying question began to form in her mind. Who exactly had she just sheltered from the storm? Ilara locked the door and leaned against it, her heart thudding a nervous rhythm against her ribs. The house felt cavernous, the lingering scent of coffee and strangers a ghostly presence. She walked to the kitchen table and sat down, placing the envelope on the worn wood. It lay there, stark white against the dark grain, looking both innocent and menacing. For a long time, she just stared at it. Taking money felt like a betrayal of her own principles, but insulting that man, that felt like a danger she couldn't comprehend. Her curiosity finally won over her apprehension. With trembling fingers, she tore open the seal. Inside was not a check, but a thick stack of $100 bills. She pulled them out, her eyes widening. She started counting, her lips moving silently. 1,000, 2,000, 5, 10. She had to stop and recount, her mind refusing to accept the number. There was $20,000 in cash on her kitchen table. A paralyzing wave of fear washed over her, cold and absolute. This wasn't a thank you. This was a statement. This was a payment meant to silence, to obligate, to bind her in some unspoken contract. No ordinary family carried this much cash. No ordinary man spoke of debt and honor with such grave finality. The scraped knuckles, the hypervigilant daughter, the talk of respect, it all clicked into place with a horrifying certainty. These were not just people in trouble. They were trouble. Her first instinct was to get rid of it, to burn it in the fireplace or bury it in the snow. The money felt tainted, dangerous. It was evidence of a world she wanted no part of, a world of shadows and violence she only saw in movies. She imagined police knocking on her door, asking questions she couldn't answer. Who were they? Where did they go? She didn't even know the man's first name. Omerta. The word surfaced from the depths of her memory, a word the old-timers in the neighborhood used to whisper, the code of silence. She realized with a jolt that she was now a part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. She quickly gathered the bills, her hands shaking, and stuffed them back into the envelope. She couldn't destroy it. What if they came back? What if they saw it as another insult? She hurried to her bedroom and pulled out an old hat box from the top of her closet, a box filled with Marco's old letters. She tucked the envelope deep underneath the bundles of faded stationery, hiding the dangerous money beneath the most precious things she owned. As she closed the closet door, she felt as though she had locked away a piece of her own peace of mind. The snow outside no longer looked beautiful and pure. It looked like a shroud, hiding secrets. And her safe, quiet home no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a cage, haunted by the ghost of a debt she never wanted. Weeks passed, and the snow melted, revealing the grey, tired streets of the Iron Gate neighborhood. Life settled back into its familiar, monotonous rhythm, and Ilara began to believe the blizzard and its mysterious guests had been nothing more than a strange fever dream. The hatbox remained in the closet, a secret weight in the back of her mind. She tried not to think about it, focusing instead on her garden, her small routines. But a seed of fear had been planted, and it was nourished by the slow decay of her community. A man named Silas, a slick developer with cold eyes and an overly friendly smile, had been buying up properties on her block for months. He wanted to tear down the old bungalows and put up a block of soulless, expensive condos. Most of her neighbors, weary and financially strained, had already sold. Ilara's house, sitting stubbornly on the corner lot, was the last holdout. Silas had started with charm, bringing pastries and making generous offers. When she politely refused explaining the house was her home, her history, his charm had curdled into something ugly. He started visiting more often, his tone laced with condescending pity. "It's a big house for one old woman," he'd say, looking at the peeling paint on her porch. "The upkeep must be a nightmare. The property taxes, they only go up." His visits became more menacing. He began pointing out fictional code violations, mentioning his friends at the city inspector's office. He hinted that a lone woman in this neighborhood wasn't safe. Each visit left her feeling smaller, more vulnerable. Her neighbors watched with worried eyes but were powerless to help. They had their own struggles. The Gazas were dealing with their son's medical bills, and Mr. Petrelli had just lost his pension. They couldn't fight a man like Silas. Ilara felt utterly alone, a small island against a rising tide of greed. One afternoon, Silas showed up unannounced, a clipboard in his hand and a predatory glint in his eye. "Ilara, we need to be realistic," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I've just received a preliminary report. Your foundation has significant structural issues. The city could condemn the property. I'm offering you a way out, a final cash offer. It's more than fair, considering." She knew he was lying. Marco had built this house on a foundation of solid rock and integrity, but the threat was clear. He was going to use the city, the law, his power to crush her. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized her. For the first time, she thought of the money in the hatbox. $20,000. It was enough for a good lawyer, enough to fight back. But using it felt like inviting one monster in to fight another. Could she use that silent, heavy money to save the very home where she had earned it? Ilara lay awake that night, Silas's threats echoing in the darkness. The house, her fortress, now felt like a crumbling ruin. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like an intruder. Every shadow in the corner looked like a man with a clipboard. The temptation to use the money was immense. It was a weapon, sitting unused in her closet, but the fear of its origins was just as powerful. What questions would a lawyer ask? Where did an old widow on a fixed income get $20,000 in cash? The thought of explaining the story of the Blizzard family made her blood run cold. She would sound like a fool, or worse, an accomplice. She felt trapped between a shark and a ghost. The next morning, exhausted and demoralized, she walked out to get her newspaper. She stopped on her porch, blinking. The section of her fence that had been leaning for months, a constant nagging reminder of a job Marco would have done in an afternoon, was now perfectly straight. The broken slat was replaced with a new piece of wood, the grain almost a perfect match. It was seamless. She looked around. The street was empty. The Gaza's curtains were drawn. No one was there. She touched the new wood, her fingers tracing the smooth, expertly cut edges. It was the work of a professional, done silently in the dead of night. A shiver, not of fear this time, but of something else, something unreadable, ran down her spine. Coincidence? A charitable neighbor? It didn't feel like it. The next day, it happened again. The deep, jagged crack in the sidewalk in front of her house, a tripping hazard she'd been meaning to report to the city for years, was gone. In its place was a patch of smooth, perfectly laid concrete, still a darker grey than the surrounding pavement. It was a silent, anonymous act of care. She asked Mrs. Gaza if she had seen anyone. The woman shook her head, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I saw nothing, Ilara." "But your house is looking better every day." The repairs continued. A loose gutter was reattached. The peeling paint on her mailbox was scraped and given a fresh, neat coat of black. They were small things, tasks on a long overdue to-do list, but they were being checked off by an invisible hand. It was deeply unsettling, yet undeniably protective. It felt as though the house itself was being fortified, its weaknesses mended by a silent guardian. Silas and his threats felt like one kind of power, loud, ugly, and bureaucratic. This was another kind of power, quiet, efficient, and utterly mysterious. She didn't know who was doing it, but she knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that it was connected to the family in the storm and the money in the hatbox. The debt, it seemed, was still being paid, and she began to wonder what would happen when the shark came knocking again, only to find the house was no longer unguarded. The day of the confrontation arrived a week later. It was a grey, overcast afternoon, the kind that matched Ilara's anxious mood. She was pruning the rose bushes along her newly fixed fence when Silas's silver sedan pulled up to the curb. With an aggressive squeal of its tires, he stormed up her walkway, his face a mask of fury. He didn't even bother with a greeting. "What game are you playing?" he snapped, waving a piece of paper in her face. It was an official-looking document from the city. "My inspector came by for an anonymous tip about foundation issues. He found nothing. In fact, he said this house is built like a fortress. And now you're fixing the place up? Are you trying to drive up the price?" "I'm not playing any games, Mr. Silas," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I told you, I am not selling." "Everyone sells," he snarled, taking a step closer, invading her personal space. "You're a stubborn old woman who doesn't know what's good for her. I've been patient. I've been polite. That's over. I will get this house one way or another. I will bury you in legal fees and violations until you are begging me to take it off your hands." His voice was rising, his face turning a blotchy red. He was losing control, the slick veneer cracking to reveal the bully underneath. Ilara stood her ground, her small frame rooted to the spot. She thought of Marco, of the life they had built here. She would not be intimidated. Just as Silas raised his hand, pointing an accusatory finger at her face, a black car glided to a silent stop behind his. It was the same model as the one the family had left in, sleek and anonymous. Two men got out. They were not large or overtly threatening. They wore simple, well-tailored dark suits and had the calm, impassive faces of men who were very good at their jobs. They didn't look at Ilara. Their entire focus was on Silas. They walked toward him, their steps synchronized, their presence sucking all the air out of the afternoon. "Mr. Silas," one of them said, his voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. "Is there a problem here?" Silas spun around, his bluster immediately deflating. He looked from one man to the other, a flicker of recognition, then sheer terror dawning in his eyes. "No," he stammered, taking a step back. "No problem at all, just a misunderstanding, a business discussion." The other man smiled, a thin, cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "We believe the discussion is over. This property is no longer a business concern for you. Do you understand? It wasn't a question, it was a command." Silas nodded jerkily, his face pale as ash. He practically scrambled back to his car, fumbling with the keys, and sped away without a backward glance. The two men watched him go. Then one of them turned his head and gave Ilara a brief, respectful nod. They got back in their car and drove off as silently as they had arrived. Ilara stood alone in the sudden, profound quiet, her pruning shears still in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. The shark had come, and he had been met by leviathans. The next morning, Ilara woke with a sense of trepidation. The encounter with Silas and her mysterious protectors had left her shaken. The quiet power she had witnessed was more terrifying than Silas's loud threats. She felt like a pawn in a game whose rules she didn't understand. She went to her front window, pulling back the lace curtain to peek at the quiet street, half expecting to see it empty, as if the whole event had been a dream, but it was not empty. Her breath caught in her throat. Lining both sides of her street, from the corner all the way down to the end of the block, were cars, dozens of them. All black, all immaculate, sedans, SUVs, town cars. They were parked in a perfect, silent, unbroken line. It wasn't 100, but it might as well have been 1,000. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming, a silent display of force that was breathtaking in its audacity. By each car stood a man dressed in a dark suit or a long overcoat. They weren't looking at her house. They were looking outward, their gazes fixed on the intersections, the alleyways, the world beyond her property line. They stood like sentinels, impassive and still, forming a quiet, impenetrable perimeter. Her neighbors began to emerge from their houses, drawn by the impossible sight. They stood on their porches, whispering, pointing, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. The Gazas, the Petrellis, they all saw it. The message was not just for Ilara, and it was not just for people like Silas. It was for everyone. It was a declaration. This small house, this elderly woman, was protected. The street, usually bustling with morning commuters and kids walking to the bus stop, was utterly silent. No cars drove through. No one dared. The men by the cars didn't speak. They didn't move. They simply stood, a silent army creating a zone of absolute respect around Ilara's home. Ilara let the curtain fall, her hand trembling. The money, the repairs, the quiet conversation with Silas, it had all been leading to this. This was the full payment of the debt. It was terrifying. It was absolute. And in a strange, profound way, it was the most secure she had felt in her entire life. She was no longer just Ilara, the widow. She was under a shield so powerful it could bring a whole city neighborhood to a standstill. Then, through the silent rows of men and metal, she saw a single figure walking up her path. It was Mr. Valenti. He was alone, and he was coming to her door. Ilara opened the door before he had a chance to knock. He stood on her porch, the same imposing figure she remembered, but this time, in the clear light of day, the authority he carried was undeniable. He was not a man hiding from a storm. He was a man who commanded them. "Mr. Valenti," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He gave a small, respectful inclination of his head. "Signora," he replied, using the formal Italian honorific. "May I come in?" She stepped aside and he entered the small hallway, his presence seeming to fill the entire house. He glanced around at the clean floors and the photos on the wall, a faint, approving look on his face. He followed her into the living room, but did not sit. He stood, his hands clasped behind his back, a king in a cottage. "I apologize if the display outside is alarming," he began, his voice calm and measured. It was not meant to frighten you. It was meant as a message that this house and the woman who lives in it are to be treated with the utmost respect. The message has been received. Ilara sank into her armchair, the same one she had slept in that stormy night. "Who are you?" she asked, the question that had been haunting her for weeks. He met her gaze directly, his dark eyes holding no deceit. "I am a man who understands the value of loyalty. My name is Don Valenti, and my family is the most important thing in the world to me." The title Don hung in the air, confirming everything she had feared and suspected. She had sheltered the head of a powerful crime family. "That night," he continued, "you did not just offer us shelter from the snow. We were in a precarious situation. There were men looking for us. You gave us a sanctuary when we were at our most vulnerable. My wife, my children, they were safe because of you. You did not ask who we were. You did not ask for payment. You saw a family in need, and you opened your door. In my world, Signora, there is no currency more valuable than that. It creates a debt of honor that can never be fully repaid, but we will spend a lifetime trying." He gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the silent army outside. "The man, Silas, he will not bother you again. No one will. Any trouble you have, any problem at all, it is now our trouble. Any threat to you is a threat to my family." He finally looked at her, and the severity in his face was replaced by something that looked like genuine, profound gratitude. "You are family now, Ilara. La Familia. You are one of us." The words settled over her, not with the chilling weight of fear, but with the warmth of a heavy blanket. La Familia. Family. She looked at Don Valenti, at this powerful, dangerous man who spoke of honor as if it were scripture, and she saw not a mob boss, but the tired father she had given soup to. She saw the husband who loved his wife, the man who treasured his children above all else. His world was one of violence and shadows, a world she could never comprehend. But the values at its core, loyalty, respect, the fierce protection of one's own, were values Marco himself would have understood. The code he lived by was just a more extreme, more dangerous version of the neighborhood code she had grown up with. "You take care of your people. The money," she said softly, thinking of the envelope hidden in her closet. "It was too much. It was a fraction of what your kindness was worth," he replied. "Use it. Fix your roof. Travel. Give it to your grandchildren. It is clean money now because it comes with our respect." He looked around her small, tidy home one last time. "The cars will be gone in an hour," he said. "Our presence will be invisible from now on, but it will always be there." He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob. He turned back to her, and for a moment, he was just a man again. "Thank you, Ilara," he said, and then he was gone. She went to the window and watched him walk down the path. The men standing by the cars straightened as he passed, a silent, rippling wave of deference. He got into his car, and one by one the engine started, a low, powerful rumble that vibrated through the floorboards of her house. As silently and mysteriously as they had arrived, the long black line of cars began to pull away, peeling off from the front and back until her street was empty once more. Her neighbors, who had been watching from their windows, slowly began to emerge, blinking in the ordinary sunlight as if waking from a dream. Mrs. Garza caught her eye from across the street and gave her a tentative, awestruck wave. Ilara's life had returned to normal, but nothing was the same. The fear that had lived in her chest for weeks was gone, replaced by a strange and profound peace. She was not alone anymore. She was part of something, a silent web of protection that stretched across the city, all because of a simple act of compassion on a stormy night. She walked to her closet, took out the hat box, and removed the envelope of money. It no longer felt tainted or dangerous. It felt like a promise. She put it on the kitchen table, a plan already forming in her mind. A new roof, yes. A college fund for the Gaza boy. And maybe, just maybe, a plane ticket to see her grandchildren. The house was quiet, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the spirit of Marco's words, with the memory of a grateful family, and with the silent, unshakable promise of loyalty. She was safe, she was respected, she was family. Thank you for watching our story. True kindness asks for nothing in return, but sometimes it is repaid in ways we can never imagine. If you've ever witnessed an act of quiet compassion that changed everything, share your story in the comments below. And for more heartfelt stories that explore the hidden corners of human connection, don't forget to subscribe.